is going to be moderated by Mr. Hamza Ali, Senior Reporter, International Tax, Bloomberg. So, and I would like now to take this opportunity to welcome Hamza Ali to proceed.
Good morning, everyone. And yeah, thanks for inviting me. And I'm very excited about this panel. I think it's full of a number of experts who've been sort of leading the way in tax transparency for the last few years. The fight against illicit financial flows is at the forefront of the development agenda. It features as part of Goal 16 in the Sustainable Development Goals, which aims to significantly reduce illicit financial flows and arms flows, strengthening the recovery and return of stolen assets, and combat all forms of organized crime by 2030. And it's not just the Sustainable Development Goals. The African Union has equally placed fighting illicit financial flows and strengthening domestic resource mobilization at the top of its agenda, recognizing these as critical to the achievement of the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. And over the past decade, there have been several studies that have pointed out the negative impacts of illicit financial flows on Africa's development, and these have attempted to measure its scope and size. It's now well established that the annual loss through various forms of illicit financial flows in Africa is well over 80 billion. The unprecedented improvements on tax transparency and exchange of information, however, have helped combat some of the this and reduced and changed the tax evasion landscape and created new opportunities to fight against other forms of illicit financial flows. Our first intervention today is Ms. Grace Perez Navarro, Deputy Director of the Center of Tax Policy and Administration, where she heads up the Global Forum on Tax Transparency, Exchange of Information, and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes, commonly referred to as the Global Forum. She also heads up their sort of various tax transparency efforts. Now, since the G20 declared the era of bank secrecy over in 2009, the OECD has been at the forefront of the fight against tax evasion. Grace, can you walk us through what are some of the things that the OECD has helped do to design a sound global response to the problems posed by tax evasion and other forms of illicit financial flows? I think I can hear you.
Hello? Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yeah. I can
okay. Well, thank you, Hamza, and good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here and to have just listened to the great progress that is being made in Africa in implementing the transparency standards. It's really wonderful to see. I have been at the OECD for 25 years, and I arrived at the OECD with the first assignment being write a report to get rid of bank secrecy. And it has taken a long time to get to where we are today. And certainly there is much more to be done to improve the situation in Africa and elsewhere in all countries. But I think we have made real and dramatic progress, as we have seen from the figures that Zaida was quoting earlier. So I want to talk a little bit about what other things we are doing, because obviously the exchange of information both on request and on an automatic basis has been a very big focus of the work since 2009, and we have been helping to push that forward and take it beyond those two things. One of the things that has been mentioned by many of the speakers this morning was the importance of the Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, which over 140 countries have signed. That convention, which was originally drafted in the 80s and then was opened up in, I believe, 2010 or 2011 to the world, covers much more than just exchange of information on request or automatic exchange. It also provides for collection assistance, simultaneous audits, all different kinds of cooperation among countries. And I would encourage all of you, and especially within the context of this regional initiative, to consider how you can make the most of that convention, all of its provisions, because there is a lot that can be done with that convention to help improve cooperation and strengthen efforts in the fight against tax evasion and also tax avoidance. In terms of the standards, one of the things that you may have seen that we have done is we've worked so hard to get rid of bank secrecy, and now we have crypto assets, which initially we were all told were fully traceable. But of course, new technologies have been developed to make crypto assets very hard to follow, and we know that crypto assets are being used in money laundering, tax fraud, tax evasion, etc. And so in March, we issued a public consultation document on new reporting requirements on crypto assets so that we don't let this new form of financial asset become a new form of tax evasion. And so we hope to be able to finalize that standard later this year, and I think that will be important. We need to always try to get ahead of these things, and I can tell you when we first started talking about crypto assets in our task force on tax crimes and other crimes, the initial response was from treasuries, let's let this technology develop and see where it goes. It can be good for the economy. And of course, it can be, but we need to also worry about the risks and prevent those risks from happening. And so we are hoping that that standard will be helpful in preventing the abuse of virtual assets. The other thing that we have been doing that is very important, I think, is not only looking at standards and ensuring their implementation, but also looking at the practical application of standards and improving the fight against tax fraud and evasion and other financial crimes. Now, we know that the Global Forum has an excellent capacity building program in place. I hope that all of you have benefited from it. But there is more to be done in terms of just thinking about how do we actually go about fighting tax fraud and tax evasion? How do we investigate these cases when they are cross-border, which makes it so difficult? Because, of course, the information is not all within your territory, and that's where the exchange of information is important. But it's even more important that we get that information quickly, that there is information sent about a potential risk so that countries can really combat these things effectively. And this is why we have done several things. One, we have the 10 global principles on fighting tax crimes. This is a report that we put out a couple of years ago. It has now been turned into an OECD recommendation encouraging all countries to take the information, the 10 principles in the report, and to use that for a self-assessment to see how each country's tax administration compares with these various standards and to see where there can be improvement. And already we've had, I think, over 27 countries that have undertaken this self-assessment and have reported that information. So I encourage you all to take a look at that to see how you can improve your fight against tax crimes. Now, the other thing that we have done is that we established almost 10 years ago the OECD Academy for Financial Crime Investigation, and that is where I first met your Director General here. He was one of our students at the Academy in Ostia, one of the early students, and I remember at the graduation ceremony he said to me, "Grace, we need an academy in Kenya." And I'm very happy that we do have an academy here in Kenya that is helping to train inspectors in the region on how to better fight financial crimes, tax evasion, money laundering, bribery, all those financial crimes, because what we have seen in our research and also in the Financial Action Task Force research is that the majority of money laundering cases end up being started from tax information that is provided to money laundering authorities. So it's really important to have a whole of government approach to look at these issues and not just fixate on your tax silo. You need to be able to cooperate with other parts of government in order to fight these crimes effectively. And so I would encourage you to take advantage of not only the 10 global principles, but also the academy that we have here in Kenya and the academy we have in Austria for the international training. The other thing that we have done is look at other factors or actors in tax evasion and tax avoidance. And one of the things that we published last year, which caused quite a stir among the legal community, was our report on professional enablers and the role that professional enablers in white-collar crime. And there we also made some recommendations that may be worth your looking at on how to address the issue of lawyers, accountants, and other professionals who enable the commission of tax evasion, tax fraud, and other financial crimes. The other thing that we have done to further this effort is we have the program Tax Inspectors Without Borders. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this program, but it was initially set up to help countries in the audit of primarily transfer pricing or other issues related to multinational enterprises. And that has been very successful. And then we received requests to get assistance on how to fight financial crimes. And so we've done a couple of pilots on criminal investigation assistance. And the beauty of the Tax Inspectors Without Borders program is that it takes experienced inspectors from one country and puts them in the other country to work side by side with the inspectors in those countries to help them build their capacity working on real cases. Now, what we have seen in the area of criminal investigation is that in some countries, tax administrations don't even have a dedicated criminal investigation unit, and so we've been helping to build those up so that that capacity is there. So it's been quite important in looking at the various aspects on how you can actually implement the fight against tax evasion, tax fraud, and other financial crimes more effectively. Because exchange of information is a tool. And first and foremost, I think one of the key objectives of the Africa Initiative is to ensure that you are all making the most of this very valuable tool in the fight against tax evasion. But beyond that, there is a more strategic component, an administrative component, an organizational component, and those are the things that we have been trying to do with these various other initiatives. We do also have, and it hasn't met for a few years due to COVID, what we call the Oslo Dialogue, the Forum on Tax and Crime, which we hope will be held in March of 2023. And that brings together all people interested in fighting tax evasion and other financial crimes. So investigators, prosecutors, anti-money laundering authorities, etc. And so we hope that we will see many of you when that is organized. But maybe I'll stop here and we can move to questions or other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you for that overview, Grace. I'll just ask one more question, which is, what is sort of, from an African sort of perspective, the benefits of exchange of information? I mean, you touched on a lot of sort of the other stuff that you've done, but can you give some specific benefits that African countries can enjoy?
The benefits from exchange of information?
For African countries specifically, yeah.
Yes, well, I think the earlier speakers have highlighted the vast amounts of illicit financial flows, and a lot of this has to do with tax evasion. And so the exchange of information has a number of benefits. One, just having the agreements in place acts as a deterrent to those who would otherwise engage in tax evasion by simply parking their money in another country. And so that is the first. So even if you do nothing with the exchange, you'll have that deterrent effect in the beginning. But of course, people will then see if you're not using the exchange of information, if you're not highlighting the fact that you've been able to pursue tax evaders with the use of this instrument, well, then that deterrent effect will disappear. So it's really important to use the information. And we do see a lot of money flowing out of Africa, and so this will be an important way to try and bring that money back, bring the tax compliance back, because after all, you know, voluntary compliance is at the core of tax administration. And if your taxpayers, your citizens feel that not everyone is paying their fair share, that people are getting away with tax evasion, then your overall compliance will go down. And so it's really important, especially in countries of this region, that they ensure that the tax administrations have that trust, that they are doing everything possible to make sure that everyone is paying their fair share. And that will in turn give an uplift to voluntary compliance.
Thank you. Our next panelist is a very experienced in sort of exchange of information. Mr. Edward Kiswete is Commissioner for South Africa Revenue Service, SARS, and a Vice Chair of the Africa Initiative. Now, South Africa has been a member of the Global Forum since 2009 and has since then made significant efforts to meet international standards and build up its exchange of information framework. South Africa has been active in tax transparency initiatives and currently is Mr. Edward Kiswete is Vice Chair of the Global Forum and a member of the Automatic Exchange Peer Review Group. Since 2017, Africa has also exchanged financial account information automatically under the Common Reporting Standards. Welcome, Mr. Kiswete. My first question for you is, what steps has South Africa taken with regard to the implementation of exchange of information, and what has been the impact on the fight against tax evasion and other forms of illicit financial flows in South Africa?
Good morning, moderator, fellow panelists, and especially the leadership of the OECD and my colleague and brother and fellow Commissioner General, Mr. Gitin Guru, and host of this conference, all protocol observed. Firstly, I have to say I am devastated that I cannot be there in person, but thankfully I'm able to participate through this virtual medium. I think it's important, firstly, Chair of the session chair, to say that South Africa has been an early adopter and have also identifies itself to be exemplary and a leader in terms of its commitment to the Common Reporting Standards and Exchange of Information Protocol. I think it's important that we recognize that this creates an institutional framework that enables against a globally recognized framework within a safe, transparent, high integrity platform that should give companies the confidence of the exchange of information. Earlier points were made about the reciprocity thereof. I lean to the reciprocity principle, but I hear the point that the earlier speaker made about the difficulty in implementation. So suffice to say that we are extremely committed and want to be one of the exemplars in this regard. It's also common cause that the loss of tax revenue and other leakages erodes the integrity of the African economies and undermines the most vulnerable of our brothers and sisters from having a improved material conditions and well-being. So our commitment to this has to be undisputable and unquestionable. Specifically turning to South Africa, I'd like to make following remarks, and there'll be few during the questions we can elaborate on that. We've institutionalized the use of data and the working with partnership to the extent that we have expressed it as 2 of our 9 strategic objectives under the strategic intent of voluntary compliance. So it is explicit, our commitment to build an evidence-based and a data-driven operating model that supplies us with information integrity